Hi everybody, I'm Dan Fine. I'm a director at Hive Business and I have been kindly invited to do my first ever video for dental tubules. It came out the back of a conversation I was having with one of my clients last week, basically around about what is going to happen to dentistry and to the dental market in the time of the coronavirus and afterwards. I haven't made any hard and fast predictions. My aim is actually to just see what themes might come up and what things are going to change, because we can make some assumptions around that. So he kindly invited me to do this video. I hope you enjoy it. Please feel free to get in contact with me afterwards. But yeah, like I say, I'm not going to give you practically exactly what the dental market's going to look like, but I can give you some themes that are going to change. I thought the best place to start was to actually give a bit of a summary of what has happened in dentistry over the past 10 years, maybe longer. A big thing that changed is the deregulation of advertising. So dental practice that historically grew off their own patient base and selling more and more dentistry to them was suddenly able to go out to the market and find new patients to bring them into the business and sell them more dentistry. This kind of dovetailed in quite nicely with an increase in market demand. So there's the kind of thing in Western culture that British people have terrible teeth, don't care about their teeth, and actually that's changed quite radically. And there's a greater awareness of what you can get. So maybe a few years ago, 5 years ago, people wouldn't have known what Invisalign was. Now it's actually a well-known household name. So the awareness in the marketplace is much greater for the type of dentistry you can get. This included with the fact that actually to deliver the dentistry, it's been, I wouldn't say de-skilled, but it's simpler and more accessible for people to do higher level treatments, higher level cosmetic treatments. And what this has meant is a fairly kind of sole trader-led stable market has actually had a boom. So particularly from 2013 to 2019, the GDP spend on dentistry went up by 80%. So we can make an assumption that that growth didn't come from the NHS, because obviously that doesn't change, and it didn't come from routine private dentistry, so it didn't come from hygiene, didn't come from checkups. So we can assume that actually in that time there was a massive amount of growth in national expenditure in these high value treatments. So what that meant is very quickly these businesses could radically grow. So we were going to practices very confidently. So we've been working with dental practices for about 8 years. And we could go in there fairly confidently and say, we are going to grow you compound by 30% year on year. And it actually didn't need any great master strokes to be able to do it, because there was very low competition. 5 years ago, there were a lot of practices without websites. They basically didn't market. So if you did anything okay, you got a really great return, a return you wouldn't see in another marketplace. So with all these private practices growing 30% compound each year, another thing started to happen, which was private equity got interested in the marketplace. So they saw the growth of the market and they said, okay, well, that's very interesting, because healthcare is a stable investment as well. So they've looked at it, and over the past few years, plenty of private equity money has come into the marketplace. Some of it funding corporates, some of it doing all different types of things. But what that has done is driven prices up. So again, this is great for dentistry. You can grow very quickly and you can sell at a high price. And the bit that it wasn't really requiring of you at this point in time is to be running a fantastically good business, a tight ship that's financially controlled, with visibility, with good reporting, with management systems, with strategic formality, all stuff that we do look to put in place with clients. But it was funny because it kind of wasn't required. A way to look at it is the level of sophistication of the mechanism that was making money in a lot of dental practices was simply the same as a sweet shop. It's just the sweets that they sold were £40,000, like an all-on 4 case. So the margin was good enough for you not to have good operations. Again, it wasn't a problem because you could sell at a huge price. So prices began to move towards being measured on EBITDA, which is earnings before interest, tax, depreciation, and amortization. And you'd be given a multiple of that. And that's the true profit of the organization after everything's been paid for. So whereas we were a few years ago going, wow, practices are going for 7 times profit, that's really decent. And anywhere else in the kind of business world, that would be pretty good. It's now getting up to, or it got up to about 9. We're even seeing 9.5 and beyond. So it was booming, but the level of, it was still an emerging market. So the biggest hindrance to growth was actually finding talented associates, so you could actually give them all these new patients that were so easy to bring in. So you could be running an okay business and actually be paying yourself kind of £150,000, £200,000, and actually it not be, not a great business particularly. But if you're earning that in any other marketplace, you'd probably be at the top of your game. So it was a slightly skewed market. And I think, if you read in the dental industry, there was a lot of talk about, the bubble will come to an end at some point. I don't think any of us foresaw it ending in this way and it being a virus, but actually what it's done and what I'm seeing over the past few weeks, working with clients to actually stabilize their organizations, is the principles will remain true during any changes that come through. So the principle of commerciality, you should run a business commercially, will be true regardless of what happens. Having good operations and processes will be even more important, because controlling efficiency and effectiveness is just going to be the difference between a business that survives and what doesn't. So seeing a lot of the practice that have done all this work front-ended, when there was a case that they didn't need to, they're actually in a fairly robust and stable position coming into this. So what happened? It's a funny situation. We all saw it coming, but I think there was a feeling that, well, it won't actually get to us, and there's probably some kind of psychological reason why you think, yeah, it won't happen to me. But I was running a business manager course. We had a couple of practices over from Ireland on it, and we're on the final day. It's quite ominously Friday the 13th of March, and word kept coming in, so people's phones kept dinging throughout the day that the schools had been closed down in Ireland. And I think that was, even though we knew it was going to have some impact on us, we didn't know how much or how soon or what would happen. I think that was a bit of a kind of rude awakening for everyone in the room that, okay, this is here. So what I think happened on that Friday the 13th is 5 big inversions. So these are 5 big themes in dentistry, which I believe have been inverted from that Friday the 13th to Monday the 16th. I think a lot has changed. Now, I'm not saying practically how these will manifest themselves. I may make some points about how this will look, but these are things that fundamentally changed about the world of dentistry. And arguably there can be a benefit to you if you understand them and kind of embrace them at this point in time. So a massive one is it went from being a seller's market to arguably a buyer's market. So what do I mean by this? On Friday, you could still have sold your practice at a huge multiple and there'd have been purchasers there. On Monday, although I know a few deals did get closed on Monday, it stopped being a seller's market. So the kind of comfortable middle ground that you could always work with a practice on, that, hey, don't worry, you can sell, the values are really good, it's worth trying to grow now, that's basically gone away. What's going to happen is, I imagine private equity money will stop coming in because the returns won't be there, or the returns won't be as predictable for a few years, that is anyway. Kind of other international investors, so other big healthcare groups that were looking at moving into the market, probably won't be looking anymore. People will probably get more fiscally conservative, so people won't be taking any large financial risks. So I'm not saying by how much, but really this, unquestionably, it's going to depress practice prices. So not great news if you're a seller. It's, for a number of my clients, it's pretty rough news that they're going to have to weather the storm for probably another 3 years, and they may not even achieve the price that they could have got on that Thursday, the 12th of March. But this is how business works. But what it does mean, this inversion has changed the market again, so it may be good for buyers. So up until this point, another thing that was happening was it was incredibly expensive to buy a dental practice and enter the dental market. So much so that essentially, if you bought a practice and you put down a 10% deposit and got your money from the bank, it would take everything that you earned from that practice to repay the debt, really. So all you could do with that practice is grow it. So you were paying over the odds for a practice for the opportunity to turn it into a good business. So it sounds kind of mad, but because the market was so buoyant, it still did make sense at that given time. Now that's going to change. So if you're an entrepreneurial associate or even an entrepreneurial owner at the moment, there could be a chance for a bit of a land grab. There's a famous Rothschild quote which goes, "Buy when there's blood on the streets, even if the blood is your own." So I think if you're looking around, there may be opportunities, even though you may be tending to your own wounds. The marketplace has changed, and whereas it was very there wasn't really room for negotiation on prices because someone would pay it. That's going to be up in the air. There's going to be people panicking. There's going to be practices closing down. I think a lot of the corporates are going to have a bit of trouble during this time. So if you're a buyer, or if you're thinking about being a buyer, this is the time to just take a deep breath and look at the opportunity and see what happens. So I'm not saying dive in, but there is opportunity. The second big inversion that I see happening, so the biggest limiter to growth, and a lot of the conversations I have is how clients, principals can't find high performance, good team player associates. It seems really difficult, and that's because there's an oversubscription of jobs. So because everyone's so desperate for associates, they can go wherever they like, and because of historic reasons, basically, a lot of associates, and this was changing naturally, are mainly fixated on their percentage, and would really like a 50% deal, rather than going to a good practice that will develop them so they can earn way more, but they might be on a 40% deal. So I think that was changing anyway, but now practices are going to close down. And corporates are going to have trouble, and people are going to be getting laid off. And whereas my advice has always been to principals, try and get your associates to do as much of the dentistry as possible to free you up to run the business, there may be a case for a short-term period of time where I'm going to say, actually knuckle down because you need as much cash as possible. So there's going to be a flooded market of associates who are looking for good positions. So I think it's a really good opportunity to actually reset the reasons for joining a practice. So it shouldn't just be about percentage. It should be about joining a practice which is going to give me new patients, which is going to develop me and encourage me to develop myself. On the flip side of that, I think it's unforeseeable that it's not going to have a recalibration of the overall percentage. And it wouldn't massively surprise me if that drops to 30% over time. Again, this doesn't have to be all bad news, but it does put more onus on the associates to actually become part of the practice and develop and increase their own personal growth. But I've got plenty of clients who are associates who are looking for the right place to do that. So again, it's a worthwhile shift to make, because of how soft the dental market was. You could an associate could be working in a clinic and actually be loss making for the practice, but it not really matter because you're not running the business properly, so you never see it. Now businesses are going to be run strictly or not survive, I think. So now it's a good opportunity to reset that, have a transparent relationship that this is how much we have to generate to earn more. And I can guarantee if you're an associate who can do kind of £2,000 a day plus, then you'll be able to negotiate on the percentage again. So it's going to be a recalibration, not necessarily a bad thing, but hopefully it will mean that the best practices get the best people and actually have a better collaboration. Another big inversion, for a few years it's basically been impossible to get a good nurse, and this is for the very real reason that actually it's quite unfair, but part of just because of the marketplace, nurses aren't paid very much. So in order to get pay increases, they're quite transient with their workflow. So it means that the kind of core team of nurses often get quite well looked after in a practice and do get raises and get benefits. But there's kind of the last person in doesn't quite get as bonded to the team that much, because there's some assumption that in 6 months they're going to get offered £1 or more down the road. So that's going to flip on its head for kind of negative reasons, that there's going to be a surplus of nurses in the market, again, because of closures and that type of thing. But I think it's a good opportunity for principals to actually reset how they view the nursing role, and actually pay them well, but develop them well as well. There's if your wages are out of skew when we look at your financial model, it's never going to be paying someone a couple of pounds more an hour. It's going to be that you've got too many people. So if you think about it that way, that it's much better to have one effective person paid a little bit more than having two ineffective people, your aim needs to be getting the right nurses, because there's going to be talent in the market, bringing them in, developing them, paying them well, and actually just mitigating the situation. I can't tell you how many board meetings I sit in where we spend so much time talking about recruiting nurses, because they're so hard to find good quality nurses. So that's a flip, which again, I think is good for the industry overall. Slightly wider thing, we have a mantra across our group, which is to our clients, which is always be recruiting. And this is quite a lot to do with the millennial generation and below. You know, my generation are often quite transient in how they work, so they aren't as interested in building careers. There's been very low unemployment, so we can jump from job to job, try new things, try and build new careers all over the place. Well, not build careers, but if we get a load of CVs, if you see someone has worked somewhere for a year, that's actually a long time at the moment. So that's going to change. People are going to be really interested in building careers. And again, this isn't about squeezing the people and trying to employ them for longer to work harder for less money. It's simply about understanding you're going to get people who are more focused and more aware of the risks of not actually building a career that's stable at this point in time. So again, it's a chance for principals to actually raise to the challenge of building a company culture that works for the team and for them. So it's not about squeezing the team and being able to burn people till you find the talent, because that will never work. It's, again, the onus is back on the owner to actually create the right environments for a good culture. So that'll change. It won't be as hard to get talent, but you're going to have to work harder to develop it. And the final big inversion that I wanted to talk about, slightly wider, but there's going to be a movement. So my business is now basically 100% working online. I'm interacting with clients online. We're having team meetings online, and it works pretty well. I'm actually kind of, we've done remote meetings before, we've done it all, and it's all been fine, but I've kind of always thought there's no kind of substitute for the real thing, for face-to-face. Still kind of believe that. But in terms of being effective, actually, it saves a lot of time in travel. It's very slick. I can speak to people when I want to. I can actually schedule the meetings and not have to move around. So actually, I think it's increased the overall effectiveness of our operation. So with this in mind, I think more business is going to move online. The implications of this for dentistry is, I actually think, bizarrely, with businesses shifting online, I think that actually the high street might come back even more. So my reasoning for this is a lot of people get their social interaction from going to an office, from the lunchtimes they have with people, and that is going to become less and less, I feel like. So there's going to be more primacy on having kind of social interactions in other ways. So I'm not saying the high street will come back in the same way, but much like we've spent the past few years talking about the retailization of dentistry, it's now more than ever important that you're presenting yourself in a retail, hopefully a high street environment, because I think people are going to be desperate for that interaction. If your work week is spent at home in your lounge with the kids running around, actually going to the shops will suddenly become a treat, whereas it's a chore. So remember, it's an inversion. I think it's going to be flipped. So it's something to be mindful of. And one thing that got the client I was speaking to on Friday excited about is really think about how dentistry is delivered, because the rules are kind of going out the window. The principles remain the same, but the rules go out the window. So should you be going out to people to meet them, to talk about stuff? I've never in my life managed to get a dentist to do a Zoom call consultation with a patient. Now they'll do it. So it's the rules are changing. Don't let it pass you by, and actually think about what you could do to have a more human element to the dentistry that you're delivering. I think it's going to be a rough year. I think everyone knows that it's a rough year for everyone. I think millennials are basically, because they don't own much, are probably going to come through this okay. There's going to be greater unemployment, but I think that means for cosmetic treatments and Invisalign, it's going to still be there to some kind of greater or lesser degree. And I think provided it doesn't go on too long, and how long's too long, I don't know. I think there'll be a recession, but dentistry will be okay. There will be some casualties though. So please, I'm sure my contact details will be somewhere. Get in contact if you want to go through any of these points. I hope you found that helpful. And yeah, I'm Dan. Thank you very much for your time. Cheers. Bye.